It was July 28th, 2024, deep in the forests of central Alaska, where tall spruce trees surrounded a quiet campground near a large wilderness reserve. The night air was crisp, scented with pine and damp earth, and the only sounds were the chirps of crickets and the distant rush of a river winding through the valley. Among the weekend campers was Linda Whitman, 44, an office manager from Portland who had driven north for a solo trip. She had grown up hiking with her father and believed she understood the wild well enough to handle it alone. Years of camping across the country had given her confidence, perhaps too much. She often trusted instinct over instruction, convinced that experience was its own protection. That afternoon, Linda arrived early and set up her tent beside her silver SUV. Rangers had given a safety briefing, reminding everyone to store food inside their vehicles to keep wildlife away. She nodded politely but listened only half-heartedly. To her, the wilderness was a place for peace, not constant caution. Her cooler, filled with meat, sweets, and soft drinks, stayed outside beneath the open sky. The faint smell of sugar and cooked food drifted into the trees, carried by the still summer air. As darkness fell, the campground settled into quiet. A pale moon climbed above the treetops, and the breeze whispered through the branches. Inside her tent, Linda rested in her sleeping bag, the faint glow of her phone fading beside her. The forest seemed calm, endless, and safe. Then, sometime after 2 in the morning, the stillness broke. A rustle at the camp's edge, followed by the heavy sound of movement through the leaves. A black bear had wandered from the forest, drawn by the sugary scent. It moved slowly between parked cars, its nose twitching as it followed the invisible trail of food. When it reached Linda's sight, the animal found the cooler. With a single swipe, it tore the lid open, scattering wrappers and containers across the dirt. It lowered its head and began licking spilled juices and cream, grunting softly with each mouthful. Inside the tent, Linda stirred. The sound of dragging plastic and heavy breathing snapped her awake. At first, she thought it was wind, until a dark outline pressed against the thin fabric beside her. The ground trembled with each step. A massive paw sank into the earth inches from her head. Terror surged through her body. She bolted upright and stumbled from the tent. Cold air rushed over her skin as she sprinted toward her SUV, her feet tangling in the grass. Pain shot through her ankle as it twisted sharply, but adrenaline carried her forward. She climbed onto the hood, trembling, heart hammering so hard she could hear it echo in her ears. From that high perch, she saw the dark shape crouched over her campsite. The bear's head moved slowly, its muzzle buried in the remains of her cooler. Torn bags, crushed cans, and scraps of food littered the ground. The moonlight caught its fur in silver streaks as it fed, calm and unbothered by the human watching from above. Linda's hands shook as she fumbled for her phone. Her body trembled uncontrollably, breath ragged, every instinct telling her not to make a sound. The air was thick with the smell of sugar and smoke, the faint sweetness of spilled soda mingling with fear. Minutes crawled by in silence. The bear pawed through the debris, licking each container clean, its heavy breathing breaking the stillness. Linda dared not move. Her ankle throbbed, and cold sweat slicked her palms. The wilderness that had once felt so peaceful now seemed vast and unforgiving. Then faintly came the low hum of an engine. Headlights cut through the trees, a ranger truck approaching from the road. The beams swept across the clearing, striking the animal's face. The bear lifted its head, blinked against the glare, and hesitated. For a long moment it seemed to weigh its options. Then, with a deep snort, it turned and slipped into the forest, disappearing among the trees as silently as it had arrived. The rangers stepped out quickly, flashlights in hand. The ground was strewn with torn fabric, food scraps, and deep claw marks in the soil. The air smelled faintly of syrup and smoke. One ranger helped Linda down from the hood, steadying her as she winced from pain. Her ankle was swollen, but she was safe. The overwhelming fear in her face began to fade, replaced by exhausted relief. They treated her ankle and noted the cause of the incident: unsecured food storage. Around them, the forest slowly brightened as dawn crept over the horizon. The first light revealed the wreckage: a shredded tent, ripped cooler, and footprints pressed deep into the dirt. The faint sweetness of marshmallows and soda still hung in the air. As other campers emerged, quiet murmurs spread across the site. The rangers spoke firmly but calmly, explaining what had happened and why. Their message was clear: In the wilderness, even a small mistake can invite danger. Linda sat near her SUV, her ankle bandaged, watching as they cleaned the area. Her mind replayed the moment she had seen the bear's shadow against her tent, the closeness of it, the helplessness. The confidence that had carried her through years of camping felt hollow now, replaced by the sharp clarity that comes only after fear. By mid-morning, the campground looked calm again. The debris was cleared, the cool morning breeze washing over the trees. Before leaving, the rangers issued a citation for improper food storage and reminded her to always secure supplies. Linda packed slowly, careful with each movement. She glanced once more at the forest before climbing into her SUV. The trees swayed softly, sunlight spilling through the branches, the place serene again, as if the night's chaos had never happened. As she drove away, the golden light glimmered through the windshield. She felt the quiet weight of a lesson that would not fade. Confidence cannot replace caution in the wild. It was March 2nd, 2025, at a large wildlife park in northern Europe, where the air was cold and a thin layer of frost covered the ground. The morning sun glowed weakly through gray clouds, casting pale light over tall enclosures that held Arctic animals from across the region. Visitors wandered between viewing areas, their breath forming clouds in the chill. Among them were Margaret and Peter, a couple in their mid-50s, who had traveled from a nearby city for a quiet weekend escape. They loved nature and had spent years visiting sanctuaries and reserves across Europe. Margaret, a schoolteacher, was known for her patience and gentle nature. Peter, who managed a small construction company, was an avid wildlife photographer. Together, they often spent weekends outdoors, capturing the beauty of places that offered peace and silence. That morning, they joined a guided tour through the park's Arctic zone. The main attraction was a massive polar bear rescued years earlier from a northern coastline. It was one of the park's most popular residents, confined within heavy steel barriers and thick glass panels. Warning signs lined the area, urging visitors to stay back, while loudspeakers occasionally repeated safety reminders. By midday, the group reached the enclosure. The polar bear paced slowly across its frosted terrain, leaving deep prints in the snow. A small crowd gathered behind the railing, phones lifted to capture the immense creature. When it stood upright, towering nearly 3 meters tall, its white coat gleamed beneath the pale sunlight. Park staff watched from nearby, ensuring no one crossed the marked line. Margaret leaned slightly forward for a better view, while Peter adjusted his camera lens. They were focused, eager for the perfect photograph. A staff member gestured for them to step back, but they were too absorbed to notice. Their movement caught the bear's attention. It stopped, its dark eyes locking onto the sound. Without warning, the polar bear lunged. The crash of its body against the barrier echoed through the enclosure, metal vibrating under the impact. One enormous paw shot through the gap, catching Margaret's sleeve and dragging her toward the rail. Her jacket tore as pain ripped through her arm. Peter lunged forward, gripping her other arm, but the force threw him sideways into the railing. A sharp crack of pain shot through his wrist as he hit the ground. Sirens erupted instantly. Park workers ran toward the enclosure with shields and sound devices. The bear struck the rail again, its claws scraping metal in a deep, grating rhythm. One ranger slammed a steel plate, creating a sharp echo that startled the animal just long enough for the others to pull Margaret free. She collapsed against Peter, her arm streaked with blood, her expression frozen in shock. For several moments, chaos filled the enclosure. Visitors screamed as staff pushed them back. Behind the fence, the bear continued to pace, agitated and restless. Medics rushed in with stretchers and supplies. They wrapped Margaret's arm in thick bandages, pressing to stop the bleeding, while Peter winced in pain beside her, his wrist bent and swelling. Around them, the Arctic zone fell eerily quiet except for alarms and the faint wind over snow. Within minutes, both were lifted onto stretchers and carried toward an ambulance waiting near the entrance. Park officials ordered the entire area closed, while rangers used deterrent sounds to calm the bear. The park's noise faded to a tense silence, broken only by the low hum of vehicles departing toward the hospital. Doctors worked through the afternoon. Margaret's wounds were deep, and she had lost considerable blood, but surgery stabilized her condition. Peter's wrist was fractured, and several ribs were bruised from the fall. Both were expected to recover. Back at the park, an internal investigation began. Footage and eyewitness statements confirmed that all barriers and signs had been intact. The park released a statement the following day, explaining that safety protocols had been ignored and emphasizing that even animals raised in captivity retained their wild instincts and immense strength. The polar bear enclosure was closed for inspection. Workers reinforced the fencing and added a wider buffer zone between visitors and the rail. New signs were installed, urging guests to respect boundaries and remember that wild creatures, no matter how accustomed to people, remain unpredictable. A week later, Margaret and Peter were released from the hospital. Both carried visible scars and heavy bandages, reminders of how a single misstep had turned fascination into fear. Their short weekend trip had become a lasting lesson neither would forget. News of the incident spread quickly, shared across local broadcasts and wildlife forums. Experts echoed the same warning. No matter how gentle or calm animals appear behind glass or steel, they are never tame. They deserve admiration, but always from a distance. When spring arrived, the park reopened. Visitors once again filled the Arctic zone, stopping to read the new warnings fixed along the railing. The frost had melted, revealing faint dents and scratches on the steel where the bear had struck. For Margaret and Peter, those marks became symbols of respect, a quiet reminder of how beauty and danger coexist, divided only by the strength of a single barrier. It was September 8th, 2019, in the vast wilderness of western Montana, where the early evening air carried the scent of pine and distant campfire smoke. The trees stood tall and silent around a small clearing near a large mountain reserve, where Megan Thompson, a 35-year-old outdoor enthusiast, was hiking enthusiast from Oregon, had decided to spend her weekend alone in nature. Megan loved camping and hiking more than anything. She worked as a freelance travel writer, exploring remote places to find inspiration for her articles. Her friends admired her independence and determination, though many quietly worried that she sometimes underestimated the dangers of the wild. That weekend, she drove deep into the forest with a small tent, cooking gear, and a box of pastries she had picked up in town. She chose a flat patch of land beside a gentle stream, not far from a few other campers who had already set up their tents. The forest around her was calm, the air filled with the steady sound of running water and the soft calls of evening birds. Megan believed she had found the perfect spot. The area, however, was marked with clear warning signs about fire safety and increased bear activity. As the sun dipped lower, she began unpacking her gear and gathering sticks for her campfire. Nearby campers noticed that her fire pit sat too close to dry brush and tried to signal her, but Megan, confident in her experience, continued setting up. She built a small circle of stones and began arranging her firewood. Her food and snacks sat open beside the pit, the sweet scent of pastries and fruit spreading quietly through the forest air. When dusk fell, the forest cooled, and shadows deepened between the trees. Megan searched for more firewood, wandering a little farther from her tent. Behind her, something heavy moved through the undergrowth. A faint rustle became a steady crunch of branches. From the edge of the woods, a large grizzly bear emerged, drawn by the scent of food. Its thick fur rippled in the fading light, and each step left deep impressions in the soft soil. When Megan turned and saw it, her body went rigid. The massive shape loomed near her tent, its head raised as it sniffed the air. She began stepping backward, her breath shallow and quick, but her boot caught on a fallen log. She stumbled and hit the ground hard, the sound echoing across the clearing. The bear flinched, startled, then lunged forward with terrifying speed. Its paw struck her shoulder, claws tearing through her jacket and skin. Pain shot down her side as she rolled away, scrambling to crawl toward the trees. The bear swiped again, smashing her cooking gear and scattering her supplies. Pots clattered and pastries rolled into the dirt as the animal growled, lifting its head high before crashing down on the camp with immense power. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the bear paused, its dark eyes fixed on the open clearing. For a moment, it stood upright, enormous against the dim sky. Then it turned and retreated into the darkness, vanishing among the trees. The sound of its heavy breathing faded, leaving behind the wreckage of the camp and the soft hiss of wind through the pines. Megan lay trembling on the cold ground, clutching her injured side. The fire had gone out, leaving only faint red embers glowing beneath ash. The air smelled of smoke and iron. Every rustle in the forest made her flinch, terrified the bear might return. Her tent was shredded, her food scattered, her clothes soaked with dirt and blood. She pressed her arm against her ribs, trying to stop the bleeding. Pain radiated through her shoulder and chest, each breath sharp and shallow. She crawled toward her backpack, which had fallen near the stream. Inside, she found a small first aid kit and began cleaning her wounds with shaking hands. The cold stung her cuts, but she kept working, wrapping her arm in gauze and whispering to herself to stay awake. Through the trees, faint flashes of light appeared, rescuers approaching. The nearby campers, having heard her screams and the crash of the bear, had called for help using a satellite phone. Within an hour, a search and rescue team reached the site, their flashlights cutting through the dark. They found Megan near her collapsed tent, her face pale and streaked with dirt, but alive. The team worked quickly, bandaging her wounds and lifting her onto a stretcher before carrying her through the forest toward the access road. At the hospital in Kalispell, doctors treated deep claw wounds on her shoulder and arm. Several ribs were fractured, and her skin was bruised and torn, but her condition was stable. Wildlife officers later investigated the area and found clear paw prints leading north toward the ridge. The bear had not returned. Rangers confirmed that the attack had likely been triggered by the scent of exposed food, and that unsecured supplies remained one of the leading causes of bear encounters. During the following days, Megan recovered slowly. The experience left her quiet and introspective. She often replayed the moments before the attack, how calm the forest had been, how quickly it had turned violent. The other campers who had warned her visited the hospital, grateful that she had survived. Officials used her story in safety workshops, teaching that confidence in nature must always be tempered with caution. When she was finally discharged, Megan returned home to Oregon to rest. The scars on her arm and shoulder healed, though they never fully faded. Months later, she wrote about the encounter in one of her travel essays, describing not only the terror but the lesson that respect for the wild must come before all else. The forest near the mountain reserve remained as vast and untamed as ever. Rangers increased patrols and installed new signs, reminding visitors to secure food and maintain safe distances from wildlife. Megan's story became a quiet warning to those who entered the wilderness that even a small mistake, like leaving a meal unattended, could turn a peaceful night into a fight for survival. The remote wilderness of northern Greenland had remained largely unchanged for millennia, its vast ice sheets and frozen landscapes serving as home to some of the world's most formidable predators. In March 2025, this pristine Arctic environment would become the setting for a terrifying encounter that would forever change one photographer's perspective on wildlife documentation. Hannah Kelson, a 36-year-old wildlife photographer from Copenhagen, had spent months planning her expedition to capture images of polar bears in their natural hunting grounds. The Danish government had issued special permits for her small research team to access areas typically restricted to scientists and indigenous hunters. Hannah had built her reputation photographing dangerous wildlife across 4 continents, but the Arctic represented her most ambitious project yet. The expedition team consisted of Hannah, her Inuit guide Nuka Peterson, and 2 graduate students from a university in Copenhagen's Arctic Studies program. They had established a temporary camp approximately 80 kilometers northeast of Qaanaaq, one of the world's northernmost settlements. The location provided optimal access to seal hunting grounds, where polar bears were known to concentrate during the spring months. March in northern Greenland brought extended daylight, but temperatures that rarely climbed above -30 degrees Celsius. The landscape consisted of seemingly endless white expanses, broken only by pressure ridges where massive ice sheets had collided and thrust skyward. These formations created both photographic opportunities and potential hiding places for the region's apex predators. On the morning of March 15th, Hannah had separated from her team to photograph a series of ice formations approximately 400 meters from their base camp. Her guide had repeatedly warned her about maintaining visual contact with the group, emphasizing that polar bears could approach with remarkable stealth across the seemingly flat terrain. Hannah had acknowledged these warnings but felt confident in her ability to spot danger across the open ice. The photographer had been adjusting her camera settings near a particularly striking ice ridge when she noticed movement in her peripheral vision. Approximately 150 meters away, a massive male polar bear was moving directly toward her position, its deliberate gait characteristic of a hunting predator. The animal appeared to be in excellent condition, its thick white coat pristine against the Arctic landscape. Hannah immediately recalled her guide's instructions about encountering polar bears. She forced herself to remain motionless while slowly backing away from the ice ridge, avoiding any sudden movements that might trigger an aggressive response. The bear continued its approach, occasionally stopping to test the air with its sensitive nose, apparently trying to determine whether this unusual figure represented a threat or potential prey. The distance between them was less than 50 meters when the bear suddenly accelerated its approach. Hannah pressed herself against a small ice mound, keeping her gaze directed downward while fighting every instinct that urged her to run. The polar bear lunged at a snowdrift mere inches from her boots, its massive jaws snapping audibly in the frigid air. From the base camp, Nuka Peterson had been monitoring Hannah's position through binoculars. Upon seeing the bear's aggressive behavior, he immediately fired a flare gun and began shouting as he approached on his snowmobile. The sudden noise and bright light caused the bear to retreat several meters, though it continued to circle Hannah's position with obvious interest. The guide's intervention provided Hannah with the opportunity to retreat slowly toward the approaching snowmobile. The polar bear, apparently deciding that this situation involved too much commotion for a successful hunt, eventually wandered away across the ice in search of easier prey. Hannah later described the encounter as lasting approximately 12 minutes, though she admitted that her sense of time had been severely distorted by fear and adrenaline. The remainder of the expedition proceeded without incident, though Hannah found herself unable to venture far from the group without experiencing anxiety attacks. She completed her photographic project, but later acknowledged that the encounter had fundamentally changed her approach to wildlife photography. The experience served as a stark reminder that, unlike many other large predators, polar bears view humans as potential prey rather than threats to be avoided. Wildlife experts later reviewed Hannah's account and confirmed that her response had likely prevented a fatal attack. Polar bears possess extraordinary patience and persistence when stalking prey, and running would almost certainly have triggered a pursuit that Hannah could not have survived. The incident highlighted the unique dangers of Arctic wildlife photography and the critical importance of experienced local guides in such environments. The wilderness areas of northwestern Montana had gained international recognition for their pristine grizzly bear habitat, supporting some of North America's largest and most dangerous predators. September 2022 would serve as a tragic reminder of how quickly recreational activities can turn deadly when human judgment fails in the presence of these formidable animals. Olivia Reed, a 34-year-old marketing coordinator from Seattle, had planned a hiking expedition with 3 friends to explore a renowned mountain trail system approximately 40 kilometers east of a small Montana town. The group had specifically selected this area for its reputation as a prime wildlife viewing territory, hoping to observe bears, elk, and other large mammals from a safe distance. The hiking party consisted of Marcus Thompson, a 36-year-old photographer, Jessica Rodriguez, a 32-year-old teacher, and Brian Wilson, a 35-year-old engineer. All 4 participants considered themselves experienced outdoor enthusiasts, though none possessed extensive knowledge of bear behavior or safety protocols in grizzly country. The trail they had chosen wound through dense coniferous forest, interspersed with natural meadows that typically provided excellent wildlife viewing opportunities during the early autumn months. Local ranger stations had reported an increase in bear activity throughout the area as animals prepared for hibernation by consuming massive quantities of seasonal foods. On the morning of September 18th, the group had hiked approximately 8 kilometers into the wilderness when they encountered a massive grizzly bear feeding in a natural clearing roughly 80 meters from the established trail. The animal, later estimated by wildlife officials to weigh between 450 and 500 kilograms, appeared completely focused on consuming berries from several productive bushes. Marcus Thompson immediately recognized the significance of the sighting. He began photographing the bear from their position on the trail, using a telephoto lens to capture images while maintaining what he considered a safe distance. The other group members watched the magnificent animal with obvious excitement, though Jessica Rodriguez expressed concerns about lingering in the area. Olivia Reed, however, became fixated on the idea of capturing a dramatic selfie with the grizzly bear visible in the background. Despite repeated warnings from her companions about maintaining distance from the animal, she began slowly moving toward the clearing while holding her smartphone in preparation for photographs. The experienced members of the group immediately recognized the danger in Olivia's actions and began calling for her to return to the trail. Marcus Thompson later told investigators that he had specifically warned about the unpredictable nature of grizzly bears and the importance of giving them wide berths, particularly during feeding activities. Olivia had approached to within approximately 25 meters of the feeding bear when she crouched down and began attempting to frame her photograph. The grizzly, which had been aware of the human presence but initially showed no aggressive behavior, suddenly raised its head and focused directly on the approaching figure. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. The grizzly bear immediately abandoned its feeding and charged directly toward Olivia's position, covering the distance between them in mere seconds. Bears, despite their massive size, are capable of reaching speeds exceeding 50 kilometers per hour, particularly over short distances. Olivia attempted to retreat when she realized the bear's aggressive intent, but her position in the clearing offered no immediate shelter or obstacles that might impede the animal's approach. She stumbled backward while screaming, but the grizzly reached her before she could regain her footing or create any meaningful distance. The initial impact knocked Olivia to the ground with devastating force. The bear struck her with its right forepaw, inflicting massive trauma to her torso and head. Her friends immediately began shouting and throwing their backpacks and hiking equipment toward the bear, desperately attempting to distract or deter the animal from continuing its attack. Marcus Thompson and Brian Wilson grabbed large branches and rocks while advancing toward the scene, making as much noise as possible in hopes of driving off the grizzly. Jessica Rodriguez used her whistle and continued shouting while calling for emergency assistance on her satellite communication device. The bear struck Olivia a second time before the combined efforts of her friends succeeded in causing the animal to retreat several meters. However, the damage had already been inflicted. Olivia had sustained injuries that would prove fatal despite the group's immediate first aid efforts and the eventual arrival of emergency medical personnel. The grizzly bear remained in the vicinity for approximately 20 minutes after the attack, occasionally approaching the group before retreating again. Eventually, the animal departed the clearing and disappeared into the dense forest, apparently satisfied that the threat had been neutralized. Emergency responders reached the scene approximately 90 minutes after the initial attack, but Olivia Reed was pronounced dead upon their arrival. An investigation by Montana wildlife officials concluded that the bear had acted in accordance with normal defensive behavior when approached too closely by a human. The incident prompted renewed emphasis on bear safety education programs throughout the region. Wildlife experts emphasized that grizzly bears, although generally avoiding human contact, would respond aggressively to perceived threats, particularly during feeding activities or when startled at close range. Officials noted that even experienced hiking groups could not guarantee individual safety when one member made decisions that put the entire party at risk. The tragedy served as a sobering reminder that wildlife photography and recreation required constant vigilance and strict adherence to established safety protocols in areas inhabited by large predators. Kodiak Island, situated in the Gulf of Alaska, has earned international recognition as the home of the world's largest brown bears, with adult males frequently weighing over 680 kilograms during peak feeding seasons. July 2025 would prove that even experienced outdoors people could find themselves in life-threatening situations when encountering these magnificent but dangerous predators in their natural habitat. The remote inlet where the attack occurred lay approximately 45 kilometers from the island's main settlement, accessible only by boat or seaplane. This pristine waterway had gained popularity among adventure tourists and wildlife photographers seeking to observe salmon runs and the massive bears that depended on them for pre-hibernation nutrition. Mark Sullivan, a 42-year-old outdoor equipment sales representative from Anchorage, had planned the kayaking expedition with his longtime friend Ethan Pierce, a 39-year-old fishing guide from the same city. Both men possessed extensive experience in Alaska's wilderness areas and had specifically chosen Kodiak Island for its reputation as a premier bear viewing territory. The pair had arrived on the island 3 days earlier, spending time acclimating to local conditions and consulting with experienced guides about the safest approaches to wildlife observation. They had rented high-quality sea kayaks and camping equipment from a local outfitter who had emphasized the importance of maintaining distance from bears and properly storing all food supplies. July on Kodiak Island brought nearly continuous daylight and peak salmon migration activity, creating optimal conditions for bear viewing, but also increasing the likelihood of encounters between humans and these powerful predators. Local wildlife managers had reported unusually high bear activity throughout the region during the summer of 2025. On the morning of July 15th, Mark and Ethan launched their kayaks into the inlet during what they believed to be an ideal time for salmon photography. The water ran clear and relatively shallow near the shoreline, with numerous rocky outcrops and fallen logs that typically attracted feeding fish, and the bears that hunted them. What the kayakers did not realize was that a massive male Kodiak bear had been fishing the same inlet for several days, establishing a territory that it would defend aggressively against perceived intruders. The animal, later estimated by wildlife officials to weigh approximately 650 kilograms, had been particularly successful in catching salmon and had grown increasingly protective of its feeding area. The men had paddled approximately 2 kilometers into the inlet when they began observing salmon jumping and thrashing in the shallow water near a rocky shoreline. Mark started to prepare his camera equipment, while Ethan maneuvered both kayaks into position for optimal photography angles, maintaining what they considered a safe distance from the shore. The massive Kodiak bear emerged from dense shoreline vegetation with startling suddenness, apparently having been resting in the shade after a successful morning of fishing. The animal immediately focused on the kayakers, likely perceiving them as threats to its established feeding territory and accumulated food cache. Without any warning behavior or preliminary posturing, the bear charged directly into the shallow water, heading straight toward the kayaks. Kodiak bears, despite their enormous size, are surprisingly capable swimmers and can move through water with remarkable speed when motivated by territorial instincts or hunger. Mark immediately attempted to paddle backward while shouting warnings to Ethan, but the bear's charge covered the distance between shore and kayaks in mere seconds. The animal struck Mark's kayak with its right forepaw, applying enough force to completely overturn the lightweight vessel and throw both men into the frigid water. The impact sent Mark's camera equipment and supplies scattering across the water's surface. At the same time, both men found themselves struggling to maintain their positions in water that was barely above freezing temperature. The bear continued its aggressive approach, circling the overturned kayaks while emitting huffing sounds and occasionally lunging toward the swimmers. Ethan managed to maintain his grip on his overturned kayak while attempting to position the vessel between himself and the approaching bear. Mark, having been thrown further from his kayak during the initial impact, found himself swimming desperately toward a small rocky outcrop that offered the only visible shelter in the immediate area. The bear's behavior suggested territorial rather than predatory motivation, as it continued to circle and threaten rather than pressing a sustained attack. However, its massive size and obvious agitation made any contact potentially fatal for the humans involved in the encounter. Both men later reported that the water temperature created an additional life-threatening factor, as their ability to swim and think clearly deteriorated rapidly due to cold exposure. Mark reached the rocky outcrop after what felt like several minutes of desperate swimming, while Ethan continued to use his kayak as a barrier against the bear's approaches. The confrontation continued for approximately 20 minutes, with the bear maintaining its aggressive posturing while the men struggled to avoid hypothermia in the frigid water. Eventually, the arrival of a salmon school in deeper water succeeded in diverting the bear's attention away from the kayakers and toward more familiar prey. The massive Kodiak gradually moved away from the overturned kayaks and began fishing in deeper water, allowing Mark and Ethan to begin their careful retreat toward shore. Both men suffered from significant cold exposure and multiple scrapes from their struggles in the rocky water, but avoided serious injuries during the actual encounter. The retreat to shore proved almost as challenging as the initial encounter itself. Mark had managed to pull himself onto the rocky outcrop, but the jagged surfaces had torn his wetsuit and inflicted numerous cuts on his hands and legs. From his precarious position, he could see Ethan still clinging to his overturned kayak approximately 50 meters away, struggling against both the cold water and the current that threatened to carry him further from shore. The bear, now focused on the salmon run, had moved to deeper water but remained visible and potentially dangerous. Mark realized that any attempt to help Ethan would require entering the water again, risking another encounter with the massive predator. However, Ethan's deteriorating condition from cold exposure made immediate action necessary. Using hand signals, Mark communicated his intention to swim toward Ethan's position, while the bear remained distracted by fishing. The distance seemed manageable, but the frigid water temperature meant that both men had limited time before hypothermia became a more immediate threat than the Kodiak bear itself. Mark slipped back into the water and began swimming toward Ethan's kayak, moving as quietly as possible to avoid attracting the bear's attention. The salmon activity had intensified, with fish jumping and splashing throughout the inlet, creating enough disturbance to mask the sounds of his approach. When Mark reached Ethan's position, he found his friend barely conscious and struggling to maintain his grip on the kayak. Ethan's lips had turned blue, and his speech was becoming slurred, indicating advanced stages of cold water exposure that could quickly become life-threatening. Working together, the two men managed to right Ethan's kayak and get him partially back inside, though the cold had severely compromised his coordination. Mark held onto the kayak's stern while kicking to propel them toward the nearest shoreline, constantly monitoring the bear's location to ensure they weren't moving closer to the dangerous animal. The bear had succeeded in catching several large salmon and appeared completely absorbed in feeding, occasionally looking up from the water but showing no interest in the slowly retreating kayakers. The abundance of fish had apparently satisfied both its hunger and territorial instincts, allowing the men to make their escape. Reaching the shoreline took nearly 30 minutes of careful navigation, with Mark doing most of the work while Ethan focused on remaining conscious and retaining body heat. Once on shore, they immediately began emergency warming procedures, sharing dry clothing and building a signal fire to attract potential rescue aircraft. The men had activated their emergency beacon during the initial attack, and a Coast Guard helicopter located them approximately 4 hours after the encounter began. Both were airlifted to medical facilities on the mainland, where they were treated for hypothermia, exhaustion, and multiple lacerations from their struggles in the rocky water. Recovery took several weeks, during which both men had time to reflect on how quickly their planned photography expedition had become a life-threatening survival situation. Mark later admitted that their preparation had focused primarily on wildlife photography techniques rather than emergency response procedures for close encounters with bears. Local wildlife officials later confirmed that the bear's behavior was consistent with territorial defense during peak feeding season, emphasizing that even experienced outdoors people could find themselves in dangerous situations when entering areas actively used by large predators. They noted that the men's survival had depended largely on the availability of salmon, which had diverted the bear's attention at a critical moment. The incident prompted discussions about enhanced safety protocols for recreational activities in prime bear habitat, including the requirement for emergency communication equipment and comprehensive briefings on wildlife behavior patterns. Officials stressed that Kodiak Island's unique ecosystem, which offers unparalleled wildlife viewing opportunities, demands exceptional caution and preparation from all visitors. The attack became part of local safety education programs, demonstrating how territorial behavior during feeding seasons could create unexpected dangers, even for experienced outdoors people. The incident highlighted the importance of understanding local wildlife behavior patterns and maintaining constant vigilance during recreational activities in areas inhabited by the world's largest land predators. September 2024 brought cool evenings in rural North Carolina, and the Harper family looked forward to a night out at the local drive-in theater. Lisa Harper, a 41-year-old mother of two, had grown up in the region and often spoke of her love for simple gatherings with her children. She worked long hours at a small-town grocery store, but weekends were reserved for family moments. Her husband had passed away years earlier, so outings like these were her way of keeping joy alive for her kids. The drive-in was a tradition she cherished, a place where cars lined up under the stars and families shared snacks, while films flickered across a towering screen. That September evening, the lot was crowded. Engines cooled while children ran between cars with popcorn bags and sodas. The Harper family spread a blanket in the back of their pickup truck, filling it with candy, sandwiches, and pillows. Lisa laughed as her children climbed over cushions, preparing for the start of the movie. Around them, other families mirrored the same excitement. Headlights dimmed, and the glow of the giant screen washed the night in pale light. The air was filled with warmth, chatter, and the comfort of routine. Beyond the edges of the theater, the woods pressed close. Few paid attention to the dark tree line, but inside the forest, hunger moved on padded paws. That year, poor acorn harvests had left black bears searching farther into human spaces for food. Drawn by the scent of buttered popcorn, sweet drinks, and grilled hot dogs, one such bear slipped quietly from the cover of trees. At first, its shadow blended with parked vehicles and wandering children. Some thought it was a prank, a costumed visitor there to add novelty to the event. But as it drew closer, its size and slow, deliberate steps silenced the laughter. The bear climbed onto the Harper's truck with startling speed, the metal groaning under its weight. Lisa turned instantly, instincts flaring, and moved to shield her children. With a swipe of its paw, the animal tore across her arm, slashing deep lines of blood as popcorn and candy scattered across the blanket. Gasps broke into screams across the lot as the danger became real. Chaos unfolded in seconds. Car horns blared as drivers jammed their hands against steering wheels, hoping to frighten the animal. Engines roared, headlights cut across the screen, and people shouted, urging families to flee. The surreal mix of a glowing movie and raw animal fury painted the night with confusion. The bear roared in return, slamming its body against the truck bed, claws ripping into metal as Lisa pulled her children down and tried to shield them. The once festive gathering had turned into a fight for safety. The commotion only grew louder, and the bear, overwhelmed by the barrage of sound and light, hesitated on the truck. Its eyes darted across the chaotic scene, nostrils flaring, body tense, torn between hunger and retreat. The night's calm was gone, replaced by panic that echoed beneath the towering screen. The black bear finally dropped from the pickup, landing hard on the gravel with a thud that echoed across the lot. Its claws scraped the ground as it swung its head from side to side, confused by the wall of sound and motion that pressed against it from every direction. Car horns blared in sharp bursts, headlights flashed wildly, and the noise of engines swelled into a storm. The animal reared once more, roaring into the night, before it turned away from the panicked crowd. With one last swipe at the ground, it bounded toward the tree line and disappeared into the woods, leaving chaos and fear in its wake. Lisa clutched her injured arm, blood soaking through her jacket, while neighbors rushed forward to help. Her children clung to her side, shaking, their faces pale with shock. Volunteers tore strips of cloth and pressed them against her wounds, trying to slow the bleeding. Sirens wailed in the distance as emergency responders sped toward the scene, guided by frightened calls from families who had fled the theater. The movie still flickered above them, but the images no longer mattered. What people carried in their minds was the vision of wild power breaking through the safety of a familiar place. Paramedics arrived quickly, lifting Lisa onto a stretcher and securing her children with concerned neighbors. As she was carried toward the waiting ambulance, headlights revealed claw marks gouged into the metal of the truck bed. Food lay scattered across the gravel, trampled in the rush of feet. Families gathered in small groups, their voices hushed, each retelling the moment when laughter turned to terror. Parents pulled their children close, whispering reassurances even as their own hearts pounded with unease. By the following morning, the story had spread across the town. Officials closed the drive-in while wildlife officers searched the surrounding forests. Tracks were found leading deeper into the woods, wide and heavy, a reminder that the animal still roamed near. Rangers explained that the shortage of acorns and berries had driven bears into towns, where they searched for scraps of food. The familiar border between wild and human space had blurred, leaving families shaken about whether anywhere was truly safe. Lisa survived her injuries, though deep gashes across her arm and shoulder required surgery. Doctors spoke of her quick actions, how she had shielded her children and kept them alive in those frantic seconds. Neighbors called her brave, praising her instinct to protect her family no matter the cost. Her children remained shaken, their memories marked by the image of the massive figure looming over them against the glow of the giant movie screen. For weeks afterward, the theater stood silent, its once busy lot empty beneath the towering screen. People drove past and remembered the night when a hungry wanderer from the forest invaded their evening, a night when everyday life collided with raw nature. The event became a warning across the county, a story shared in schools, churches, and homes, reminding all who listened that the wilderness could appear at any moment, even in places where no one expected it. July 2025 brought searing heat across Wyoming, where wildfires burned for weeks and crews labored day and night to keep the flames from consuming more of the land. Among those crews was James Turner, a 34-year-old man who had dedicated his adult life to fighting fires in the most unforgiving conditions. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried the calm confidence of someone who had faced danger many times before. Years of experience had taught him to endure smoke, exhaustion, and risk, but he also carried the weight of leadership, guiding younger firefighters in the field. His crew respected his steady presence, and he often took on the hardest tasks without complaint. The camp they built deep in the scorched forest was little more than tents, a supply cache, and tools spread across ash-covered ground. Charred trees stood like black skeletons, and the air smelled of smoke even at night. Days were filled with cutting fire breaks and hauling gear. Nights were restless, spent listening to the crackle of distant flames. The crew had worked until their muscles ached before finally lying down under the smoky sky. They did not know that in the same hills, a massive grizzly had been roaming, thin from hunger, its normal food gone from fire and drought. At 3 a.m, the quiet of camp was broken by the tearing sound of claws raking into boxes. The bear had found their food cache and was scattering supplies across the ash. Plastic cracked, metal rattled, and wrappers tore as it gorged on whatever it could find. James Turner rose quickly, instinct pushing him forward. Grabbing a shovel, he charged at the bear, swinging with all his strength in an attempt to drive it away. The animal spun with shocking speed, its eyes burning with frenzy. In one bound, it closed the distance, slamming James to the ground. Its weight crushed the air from his lungs as claws tore through his fire-resistant clothing as if it were paper. The shovel flew from his grasp as pain ripped through his body. The sound of his cries tore through the camp, waking the others. The crew leaped from their tents, grabbing Pulaskis and axes, the tools they used to carve fire lines, now raised as weapons. They shouted, struck at the air, and lunged at the beast, but each blow only seemed to enrage it further. The grizzly roared, its massive head snapping from side to side, its claws slashing at the men who dared approach. Sparks flew from steel, striking the ground as the crew tried desperately to save their comrade. James writhed beneath the beast, ribs cracking under its weight, muscles torn by raking claws. Ash filled the air, the firelight from smoldering stumps casting a red glow over the chaos. Desperation mounted as every second stretched into eternity, the crew's efforts seeming hopeless against the raw power of the predator that had claimed their camp. The moment seemed lost until one firefighter raised a flare gun, aiming not at the sky, but directly at the raging animal. With a loud burst, the flare ignited and struck, burning into thick fur. The sudden blast of fire and searing heat shocked the beast, which reared back, thrashing wildly. Smoke and the smell of scorched hair filled the camp as the predator bellowed in fury. For several tense seconds, it stomped the ground, swinging its head in confusion and rage, before finally retreating into the charred hillside. The forest swallowed its massive form, leaving only echoes of its roars fading into the night. Silence gripped the camp except for the labored breathing of the men and the groans of James lying broken on the ground. His body bore deep wounds across his shoulder and chest, and his side rose unevenly with each painful breath. Blood stained the ash beneath him. His comrades dropped their tools and swarmed to his side, their hands pressing against torn flesh, wrapping bandages made from scraps of shirts, doing anything to keep him alive. Every face was pale, every hand shaking, the weight of what had just happened heavy on them all. Through the long hours before dawn, the crew kept watch, fearing that the bear might return. They built small fires around the camp, not for warmth but as barriers of light and smoke. The smell of burned food lingered in the air, mixed with the iron scent of blood, both reminders of the close call they had faced. James drifted in and out of consciousness, his groans softening into silence, his survival resting in the hands of those who refused to let him go. At first light, they signaled for help using radios and flares. A helicopter finally arrived, its rotors chopping the smoky air as it descended near the burned clearing. Medics carried James aboard, working quickly to stabilize his broken ribs and torn muscles. The rest of the crew watched as the aircraft lifted into the sky, the sight evoking both relief and a sense of emptiness. Their leader and friend had gone to fight another battle in a distant hospital. In the days that followed, the story spread through nearby towns. Officials warned that wildfires not only destroy land, but also push starving animals closer to humans, creating dangerous encounters in unexpected places. For the firefighters, the camp that night became more than a memory. It was a lesson written in blood and ash, a reminder that nature's fury comes in many forms, from flames that consume mountains to predators that stalk in the dark. James lived, though scars covered his body, and his strength would take months to return. His survival became a symbol for his crew, proof that even when chaos strikes without warning, courage and swift action can prevent disaster from becoming fatal. Yet none of them forgot the sound of claws tearing through camp, or the weight of knowing how close they all came to being lost in that blackened wilderness. November 2022 brought a cold wind to the city of Lublin in Poland, where a small traveling circus had set up its striped tent on the edge of town. Among the performers was a veteran animal trainer named Marek Kowalski, who had spent most of his adult life working with large predators. He was well known in his circuit for taming lions and teaching bears to perform routines for cheering audiences. Yet behind the applause, the work carried shadows. Long hours, constant stress on the animals, and the strain of keeping them obedient left marks both on the beasts and those who controlled them. Marek bore scars on his arms from past close calls, each one a reminder of how little control existed once an animal's patience snapped. The star attraction of that night's performance was Boris, a European brown bear that had been part of the circus since it was a cub. The animal, now fully grown and at its peak strength, was chained and fitted with a muzzle during each show. Trainers had conditioned it to balance on stools, roll barrels, and even bow to crowds under the glare of bright lamps. Children often clapped and laughed, their parents snapping photographs of the unusual spectacle. But those who worked closest to Boris had noticed his restlessness growing. In the days before the performance in Lublin, stagehands whispered about the bear's pacing, its loud huffs, and the way it resisted commands. On that November evening, the tent filled with families eager for entertainment. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of the crowd, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Music played from worn speakers as the performers led Boris into the ring, his chain clinking as he stepped heavily across the sawdust floor. Marek guided him to the center, raising his hands to cue the start of the routine. Under the harsh lights, Boris was made to stand, shift weight, and perform gestures unnatural to any wild creature. The audience clapped, delighted by the display, but tension brewed unseen beneath the surface. Boris's muscles tensed, his chest heaving with sharp breaths. Sweat shone on Marek's forehead as he pressed the bear into another trick. In a sudden eruption, the animal broke from the sequence. With a violent surge, Boris lunged forward, knocking Marek to the ground. The chain snapped free from its anchoring, clattering against the stage. Chaos spread instantly. The crowd gasped as the huge form towered over its handler, claws flashing in the glare. Marek struggled beneath the crushing weight, the muzzle tearing loose as the bear slashed downward, ripping through his shoulder. Screams echoed against the canvas walls as benches toppled and people stampeded toward the exits. Parents clutched their children, stumbling in the rush as the once-ordered tent collapsed into panic. Boris bit into Marek's leg, the sound of tearing fabric and flesh mixing with the frantic cries. Stagehands scrambled with extinguishers, releasing bursts of white spray across the ring, filling the air with choking clouds. Others fired blanks from small pistols, each shot cracking through the noise. But the bear, wild-eyed and furious, held on. The performance had turned into a nightmare in seconds, the scene spiraling into pure chaos. The fire extinguishers sprayed thick white mist that clung to the air, clouding the scene as Boris thrashed in confusion. The blasts of sound from blank rounds cracked louder, bouncing inside the canvas walls. The bear hesitated for a brief moment, blinking through the haze, muscles rippling as it swung its head from side to side. Marek lay broken beneath the heavy form, his clothes shredded, his body slick with blood, but still clinging to life. With one last furious swipe, the animal finally staggered back, stumbling toward the cage that had been hastily rolled into the corner. Stagehands moved in frantic unison, slamming the steel gate open as others waved poles and sprayed more bursts of smoke. Shouts mixed with the roars of the beast as it lumbered into the shadows of its pen, driven less by obedience than by the chaos surrounding it. The door clanged shut, the lock snapped in place, and the tent fell into stunned silence, broken only by the cries of the injured trainer. Families continued to rush out into the cold night, some carrying children, others trembling as they stumbled across the muddy field beyond the tent. Inside, the aftermath grew heavier. Marek was lifted carefully by medics who had been called from outside, his torn leg wrapped in cloth as they tried to slow the bleeding. His shoulder hung uselessly, bone splintered by the weight of the claws. His face was pale, his breathing ragged, but he was alive. Every step to carry him out was marked with fear that the bear might lunge again, though the cage rattled only with the echo of its heavy breaths. By morning, the attack had become the talk of the city. Newspapers printed stark accounts from shaken spectators who described the sight as nothing less than terror. Parents spoke of children who cried through the night, haunted by the sound of roaring under the striped roof. Officials arrived to investigate, their questions sharp, their faces grim as they examined the cage and the chains that had failed. Debate soon filled the streets. Voices rose against the use of wild animals for tricks, calling the scene proof of cruelty and danger. Others mourned the sight of an injured trainer, wondering how long scars and pain would follow him. For Marek, survival came at a terrible cost. His career forever ended, his body marked by wounds that would never fully heal. For the witnesses, the memory of that night would never fade, a chilling reminder that no cage or chain could erase the nature of a bear forced to perform. On July 18th, 2023, the heat of a midsummer afternoon hung heavy over a quiet gas station tucked deep in northern Maine. The road stretched endlessly through thick forest, and for miles there was no sign of another building or voice. A small group of bikers, tired and dusty from hours of riding, pulled up to refuel. The air smelled of gasoline and pine, and the hum of engines faded into the stillness of the woods. Laughter, and the clinking of helmets broke the silence as they stretched their legs, unaware that something massive was already watching them from the shadows beyond the pumps. The scent of snacks, spilled soda, and open fuel containers drifted through the warm air. From the tree line, a large black bear stirred. Hungry and bold, it lumbered closer, its nose twitching as it caught the mix of food and human scent. The riders were distracted, taking off gloves and pulling out sandwiches from their saddlebags. None noticed the dark shape slipping between the trees until it was already at the edge of the parking lot. Mark Reynolds, standing beside his motorcycle, spotted the bear first. Before he could react, the animal surged forward with terrifying speed, closing the distance in seconds. It swiped a heavy paw across Mark's side, knocking him against his bike. The motorcycle toppled with a crash, metal scraping against concrete, and the roar of panic filled the air. Helmets rolled across the lot as the bear turned, eyes fixed on movement and noise. Another rider tried to grab a metal canister, banging it against the pump post, but the sound only seemed to agitate the animal. It lunged again, claws flashing, tearing through a leather jacket and slicing deep into the forearm of another biker. The man fell backward, clutching his arm as blood spattered across the ground. The bear's attention shifted toward the smell of food inside an open saddlebag. It clawed and bit at the pack, tearing through granola bars and wrappers, growling with each motion. The bikers scattered, shouting and waving their arms, trying anything to scare it off. Their motorcycles, once symbols of control and power, now lay like fragile toys under the force of the predator's rage. For several tense minutes, chaos ruled the station. The bear moved between bikes, pushing one over with a grunt and raking its claws through another's seat. Mark, dazed and bleeding, crawled behind a fuel pump, gripping his side and watching in disbelief. The others stayed low, too terrified to move closer. Every sound, every clatter of metal, drew another aggressive turn from the animal. Just when it seemed the assault might not end, the distant rumble of an approaching truck broke through the noise. The headlights flashed through the lot, and the bear froze. Its ears flicked toward the sound, and with a low snarl it turned and lumbered back toward the tree line. Within seconds, it vanished into the shadows, leaving only overturned bikes, torn gear, and the ragged breathing of shaken survivors. When the truck pulled into view, its driver found the scene in ruins. Scattered helmets, fuel dripping onto the pavement, and the smell of fear still thick in the air. The bikers stood in stunned silence, bruised, bloodied, and trembling from what had just happened. The calm of the wilderness had turned deadly in a matter of moments, and the road that once felt free now seemed filled with unseen danger. The stillness that followed the bear's retreat felt unreal. The sound of its heavy steps faded into the forest, until only the faint hum of engines and the soft rustle of trees remained. The bikers stood frozen among the wreckage, their hearts pounding, breaths uneven. The faint scent of blood and gasoline mingled in the cool air, a sharp reminder of how close they had come to disaster. Mark leaned heavily against the side of his fallen motorcycle, his arm throbbing and his side covered in dirt and scratches. Nearby, another rider sat on the ground with a torn sleeve, his forearm wrapped in a strip of cloth to slow the bleeding. The gas station, once a place of rest, now resembled a chaotic scene. Helmets lay cracked, seats torn apart, and supplies scattered across the concrete. Empty snack wrappers fluttered in the wind, a silent trace of what had drawn the predator in the first place. The smell of spilled fuel hung in the air, thick and dangerous. None of them spoke. Every rustle from the nearby brush made them flinch, as though the creature might return at any moment. After several minutes, the truck driver, who had unknowingly scared the bear off, stepped closer, eyes wide at the destruction. He helped the bikers move their damaged motorcycles away from the pumps and gather their gear. The injured were guided to the shade of the gas station awning, while the rest scanned the forest edge, alert for any movement. Slowly, the panic gave way to disbelief. When emergency services finally arrived, the scene was quiet again, though fear still lingered. Paramedics tended to the wounds, cleaning cuts and wrapping bandages around torn flesh. Mark's shoulder and ribs were bruised but not broken. Another biker's arm had been deeply cut, requiring stitches. The others were shaken, but alive. The officers who came after took photos of the broken bikes and claw marks on the concrete, noting how easily the animal had overpowered a group of strong, capable riders. As the sun began to set, long shadows stretched over the lot, and the bikers sat in silence, watching their ruined machines being loaded into a tow truck. The reality of what had happened began to sink in. A peaceful stop on an empty road had almost cost them their lives. One mistake, leaving food out, ignoring the forest's quiet, had invited danger that none of them could control. By evening, news of the attack had spread through nearby towns, warning travelers to secure their supplies and remain vigilant. Wildlife officers arrived later to search for the bear, explaining that black bears in the area had become increasingly bold due to food left behind by campers and travelers. They placed traps and posted warnings along the roadside, but most locals knew that once a bear learned to associate humans with food, it often returned. Days later, the riders reunited to collect their repaired bikes from a nearby shop. Their laughter was softer now, their voices quieter. None could shake the memory of claws tearing through metal and the helpless feeling that came with being trapped between fear and the need for survival. Mark's arm still carried faint scars, and every time he rode past a forested stretch, his grip on the handlebars tightened just a little. The memory of that day would remain etched in their minds forever, not as a story of adventure, but as a lesson in how quickly calm can turn into chaos. The wilderness, even from the edge of a gas station, had shown its power. For the bikers, it was a lasting reminder that nature never forgets its strength, and that even brief moments of carelessness can bring one face to face with something wild and unstoppable. It was September 14th, 2025, in the remote woodlands of eastern Russia, where endless forests stretched toward the horizon. The late summer air was warm but heavy with moisture, and the scent of pine and damp soil lingered among the tall firs. Sunlight filtered through drifting mist, giving the woods an eerie calm. That morning, a small group of hikers gathered near a protected nature reserve to explore the rugged terrain, known for its striking scenery and elusive wildlife. Among them were two close friends from the nearby city, Elena Voronova, 34, and Irina Kozlova, 37. They worked together at a travel agency that specialized in adventure tours across the Far East. Elena was outgoing and fearless, drawn to challenges that tested her limits. Her social media pages were filled with pictures of remote mountains and wild coasts, each one marked by her confident smile. Irina, more reserved, admired her friend's daring nature, but preferred quiet moments in nature over risk. They balanced each other, Elena's thrill-seeking energy and Irina's steady calm, a friendship shaped by contrast and trust. Their guide, Oleg Mikhailov, had spent years leading groups through the region's wilderness. He was known for his caution and deep respect for wildlife. Before they began, he reminded everyone to stay close and never wander off the marked path. Recent reports had warned of increased bear movement as the animals prepared for hibernation, and he wanted no mistakes. The group started their trek beneath a pale, golden sun. The path wound between mossy trees and slow streams. Birds called from above, and the rhythm of footsteps echoed softly through the undergrowth. Hours passed peacefully, until they reached a wide hilltop overlooking the forest. From there, the landscape spread out in a patchwork of grass and scattered trees, glowing faintly in the afternoon light. Elena stopped, struck by how perfect the clearing looked for photos. The open grass caught the sunlight just right, and the trees framed the view like a painting. Ignoring her guide's warnings that echoed in her memory, she stepped beyond the marked trail, eager for a better angle. Her boots sank into the soft ground as she raised her camera, focusing on the distant line of hills. Irina hesitated at the edge of the path, torn between worry and trust. She called out softly, but her friend's excitement overpowered her caution. Reluctantly, she followed, watching the grass bend under their steps as they moved deeper into the clearing. Neither noticed the quiet shift of the forest, the stillness that often comes before something terrible. Under a dense cluster of trees not far away, a massive grizzly bear rested among the shadows. The faint sounds of laughter and snapping twigs reached its ears. Startled and disoriented, it rose to its full height, the sunlight glinting off its thick brown fur. Its muscles tensed, nostrils flaring as it searched for the source of the disturbance. The bear charged. It burst through the undergrowth with explosive force, the sound of breaking branches ripping through the quiet air. Elena turned too late. The animal struck her down in an instant, her camera falling to the ground as its claws tore through the brush. Irina rushed forward, but the bear's strength sent her sprawling backward into the grass. Shouts erupted behind them as Oleg and the other hikers raced toward the chaos, waving sticks and raising their voices to create noise. The forest filled with panic. Dust, leaves, and fear spun together in a blur of motion. Oleg fired a flare into the air, its bright light slicing through the canopy. The crack echoed, startling the bear long enough for it to stop. With a deep growl, it turned, retreating toward the dark edge of the trees. Silence fell again, broken only by ragged breathing and the fading hum of the flare as it drifted away. Oleg ran to the fallen women. Elena lay motionless, her body marked by deep wounds, the ground around her stained dark. Irina was barely conscious, her breathing shallow and uneven. The others gathered in shock, their faces pale as Oleg tore strips of fabric from his pack to press against her bleeding shoulder and side. The radio crackled weakly as he called for help, his voice low and steady, though fear edged every word. They stayed close together, scanning the trees in case the bear returned. The air was heavy and still, the world holding its breath as they waited. When the rescue team finally arrived nearly 2 hours later, the scene was grim. The medics worked swiftly, their hands moving with quiet precision. Irina was lifted onto a stretcher and given oxygen, her body covered in blood-soaked bandages. Nearby, another blanket was gently placed over Elena. The remaining hikers stood in stunned silence, the reality of what had happened sinking in like cold rain. By late afternoon, the team began their slow descent toward the ranger post. The forest was quiet again, its beauty turned hollow by the memory of what it had taken. When they reached the edge of the reserve, an ambulance waited on the dirt road. Irina was rushed to a hospital in the city, her condition critical but stable. The others were treated for shock and minor injuries. Officials later confirmed that the bear had been startled awake by sudden movement and acted defensively. It was not pursued, as the attack was ruled a natural reaction to disturbance. The site was closed, and new signs were placed along the trails, warning visitors never to step beyond the marked boundaries. News of the incident spread quickly across the region. Wildlife experts repeated the same message, that wild animals, no matter how familiar the environment seems, remain unpredictable. Even experienced hikers must respect the rules meant to protect both people and wildlife. Days later, Elena's memorial was held in her hometown. Friends and family gathered quietly to remember her fearless spirit and love of exploration. Irina remained in the hospital, recovering slowly from her wounds, haunted by the loss of her closest friend. The forest returned to silence, but that silence carried a warning, one written in memory and grief. In those wild places where beauty meets danger, even a single careless step can change everything. It was December 18th, 2023, along a frozen stretch of highway winding through the Yukon wilderness of northern Canada. The sun hung low behind a ceiling of gray clouds, casting pale light across endless snowfields and spruce trees glazed with ice. The air was sharp and still, and the road stretched ahead in perfect silence. Deborah Miller, 51, an office worker from Alberta, was driving her silver SUV north toward Whitehorse after visiting friends. She loved long, solitary road trips, the hum of the tires, the empty landscape, and the calm that came from being completely alone. The Yukon's vastness felt like freedom, though it demanded respect. Deborah had grown up in a small Canadian town, balancing city life with a lifelong love of the outdoors. Years of camping and hiking had built her confidence, and she often trusted her instincts over caution. That morning, she stopped at a roadside diner in a small town before continuing north. After eating, she tossed her leftover wrappers and napkins into a plastic bag. Then later, without thinking, threw the bag out of the window as she drove. The faint smell of meat and grease lingered in the frigid air, carried far across the snow. The wrappers landed near the tree line, where the scent spread through the still wind. Deep in the forest, a grizzly bear lifted its head. Food was scarce in winter, and the smell of fat and salt cut through the cold. The animal began to move, slow but determined, following the invisible trail toward the highway. 20 minutes later, Deborah pulled into a small rest area overlooking a frozen river. She stepped out to stretch, her boots crunching on the icy gravel. The landscape was silent, no wind, no sound, but her breath. Then came a faint crack, the brittle snap of branches shifting under weight. From the trees emerged a grizzly, its thick fur dusted with frost. It moved with heavy grace, sniffing at the air. Deborah froze as she saw it. Massive, powerful, eyes black and fixed. The animal's nose led it straight toward her vehicle, where traces of food scent clung to the tires and doors. The bear reached the SUV and struck the bumper with one paw. The metallic clang echoed through the clearing. Panic surged through Deborah as she stumbled backward and threw herself inside the driver's seat. Her fingers fumbled with the keys, the tires spinning helplessly on ice. The Grizzly reared up on its hind legs, towering above the windshield. Its paw came down with a violent crack, spreading a web of fractures across the glass. The entire frame shuddered. Deborah ducked instinctively, heart racing as claws scraped against metal. Each sound was deep, deliberate, and terrifyingly close. The bear circled the SUV, breathing heavily, fogging the windows with each exhale. Its snout brushed the door handle, leaving streaks of moisture that instantly froze. Deborah gripped the steering wheel, forcing herself not to move. The cold air burned in her lungs, her muscles locked in silence. For long minutes, the animal lingered. It pawed through the snow near the tires, drawn to the faint scent of grease. The SUV rocked slightly with each shove, the noise of metal bending beneath its strength. Deborah's foot hovered over the accelerator, but she dared not move. Her world had narrowed to the sound of her pulse and the soft rumble of the bear's breathing. Then the wind shifted. The scent of food drifted away into the forest. The bear lifted its head, nostrils flaring, and turned toward the trees. With a final snort, it lumbered off, its huge shape fading into the gray distance. For a moment, Deborah couldn't move. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise had been. Her breath came in short, uneven gasps as she realized she had been holding it for far too long. When she finally turned the key again, the hum of the engine sounded fragile against the emptiness outside. She drove forward slowly, the cracked windshield catching the dim light. Her hands trembled on the wheel. Only when she reached the next stretch of open highway did she pull over, resting her forehead against the steering wheel. Her body shook from adrenaline, and tiny cuts from shattered glass stung her skin. The encounter had lasted only minutes, but it felt endless. Later that day, Deborah reached a ranger station near a small town. Officers inspected the vehicle, noting the claw marks and shattered glass. They confirmed her account. A grizzly, likely drawn by the scent of discarded food, had followed it from the forest. They reminded her that in the Yukon's frozen wilderness, even the faintest smell of grease or sugar could travel for miles and draw powerful predators to the roadside. The next morning, reports of the incident spread quickly through nearby communities. Rangers used the event as a warning, posting new signs at rest areas, urging travelers to secure all waste and keep vehicles scent-free. Deborah stayed the night at a small lodge, her mind looping through the sound of claws on metal and the moment when the bear's face had filled her windshield. When dawn came, she looked out over the white expanse of forest and felt a mixture of gratitude and unease. She had survived, but the memory had changed her. Weeks later, the SUV was repaired, though faint claw marks remained etched into the driver's door. Deborah never again threw food from her window. The wilderness, she realized, was not a place to take lightly. Its beauty concealed a fierce balance, one that punished carelessness swiftly. Every time she saw the faint scratches on her car, she remembered that balance, the thin line between calm and catastrophe on a frozen Yukon highway. It was July 9th, 2024, deep in the wilderness of Kodiak Island, Alaska. The morning sky was gray and low clouds hung over the thick forest. The air smelled of wet moss and pine, and a cool wind moved through the tall spruce trees. This remote island, known for its massive brown bears, was both beautiful and unforgiving. Few people lived here, and those who came understood the rules of survival. Among a small group of hikers that day was Cynthia Reynolds, a 52-year-old travel blogger from Portland, Oregon. Her life revolved around exploring wild places and sharing them with thousands of readers who admired her courage and curiosity. Over the years, her photographs had shown sunsets over desert cliffs, frozen lakes, and her smiling face against endless horizons. She often wrote that she wanted to see every untamed corner of the world before turning 60. This trip to Alaska was her next great story, a chance to witness the raw wilderness of Kodiak Island. The group was led by Noah Clark, an experienced backcountry guide who had spent more than 2 decades working across Alaska's remote regions. He understood the terrain, the weather, and most importantly, the bears. Before they began, Noah gathered the hikers and reviewed safety rules. Never stray from the group, stay clear of marked feeding zones, and make noise while hiking to avoid startling wildlife. It was early berry season, a time when bears often appeared near the trails to feed and prepare for winter. The hikers set out along a narrow trail winding through damp undergrowth and dense shrubs heavy with berries. The air was cool and filled with the sounds of birds calling from high branches. Each step pressed into the soft, rain-soaked earth. They carried metal pots and bear spray as precautions, their breaths visible in the misty air. After several hours, they reached a clearing near a stream bordered by low bushes. There, among the foliage, a female Kodiak bear stood with 2 cubs. Her dark fur glistened from the water, her shoulders massive and strong. She was focused on the berries, her movements slow and deliberate. Noah raised his hand, signaling everyone to stop. The hikers stood silently, watching the bear from a respectful distance. The scene was breathtaking, wildness alive and close, yet contained by quiet respect. But Cynthia's eyes were fixed on her camera. She wanted the perfect shot. As the others remained still, she took a step forward, then another. The soft click of her camera strap and the rustle of her backpack drew attention. Noah whispered sharply for her to stop, but the flags marking the safety boundary fluttered behind her as she crossed them. Her boots sank into the muddy soil as she lifted her camera toward the cubs. The bear lifted her head. A low growl rumbled through the clearing, deep and primal. The smell of granola and dried fruit from Cynthia's pack carried faintly on the wind. The animal's demeanor changed instantly, from calm to alert, from mother to defender. Cynthia froze, realizing her mistake too late. Her foot slipped on wet ground. The bear lunged forward with explosive speed, crashing through the shrubs. Cynthia fell backward as the massive animal struck her with its paw, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. Chaos erupted. The other hikers banged metal pots and shouted, the sharp noise echoing through the forest. The bear reared up, roaring, then lowered again with terrifying strength. Noah grabbed a canister of bear spray, but could not risk using it so close to Cynthia. The attack was over within moments. Brutal, instinctive, unstoppable. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the forest fell silent except for the frantic clatter of metal. The mother bear turned away, huffing and warning. Her cubs hurried behind her as she retreated into the dense brush. Branches snapped as the family vanished among the trees. Cynthia lay motionless on the damp ground. Her jacket was shredded, and the mud beneath her was streaked with red. Noah dropped beside her, pressing his scarf against the wounds. Her breathing came in shallow bursts, her eyes half open. Another hiker ran for the emergency radio pack they had left earlier on the trail. Static crackled as they tried to contact the ranger station. Minutes passed in slow agony. The cold air thickened with the smell of iron and earth. Noah spoke softly, his hands trembling as he tried to stem the bleeding, but the wounds were deep, and the color drained from her face. Before the helicopter could arrive, her breathing stopped. The forest, moments ago filled with chaos, was silent once more. When park rangers reached the scene nearly an hour later, they secured the site and guided the surviving hikers down the trail. A rescue helicopter hovered overhead before landing in a nearby clearing. Rangers marked claw prints, blood trails, and the torn ground. The bear was not pursued or harmed. The attack was deemed a defensive response. The mother had acted only to protect her young. News spread quickly across Kodiak Island and beyond. Local officials urged travelers to respect wildlife boundaries, reminding them that the island's brown bears are among the largest on Earth, capable of weighing over 1,000 pounds. Experts repeated the lesson that approaching a bear with cubs, even for a moment, was one of the gravest mistakes in the wild. Cynthia's remains were flown home to Oregon. Her family released a short message of grief and remembrance, urging others to learn from her tragedy. Friends remembered her as fearless, a woman whose passion for adventure inspired many, though her final journey had ended in heartbreak. In the weeks that followed, authorities strengthened safety measures across Kodiak Island. Trails near active berry fields were closed during feeding months. Guides received additional training, and visitors were required to attend mandatory briefings before entering remote zones. The story of Cynthia Reynolds spread across outdoor communities worldwide. It was retold in hiking forums, safety seminars, and travel blogs, not as a tale of fear, but as a warning born from respect. Her name became a quiet reminder that even the most experienced adventurers must yield to the power of nature. On Kodiak Island, the forest soon grew green again, the signs of that morning fading under moss and rain. Yet those who hike its trails still pause by the flagged boundaries where her story is now remembered, a lesson written in the silence between human ambition and the wild. The remote wilderness of Ussuri-Krai in far eastern Russia had always been known for its unforgiving nature and dangerous wildlife. This vast region bordering China and North Korea is home to some of the world's largest brown bears, with males often weighing over 600 kilograms. The area's dense forests and winding rivers had witnessed countless encounters between humans and bears over the decades, but few as tragic as the one that would unfold on September 7, 2025. Viktor Sokolov, a 42-year-old construction foreman from Vladivostok, had planned the fishing expedition as a late summer getaway with his longtime friend, Irina Makarova, 38, who worked as a school teacher in the same city. They had decided to bring along Irina's younger siblings, Daniil, 16, and Alina, 14, who were visiting for their school holidays. The group had rented a modest 18-foot motorboat from a local outfitter, planning to spend the day fishing for salmon and pike along one of the region's pristine waterways. The morning had started promisingly enough. Viktor had successfully navigated the boat approximately 15 kilometers upstream from their launch point, finding a secluded stretch of river that locals claimed held some of the best fishing in the territory. The water ran deep and clear, flanked by towering conifers and dense undergrowth that created an almost cathedral-like atmosphere. Irina had remarked earlier that morning how peaceful everything seemed, a stark contrast to their busy urban lives. What the fishing party did not know was that the summer of 2025 had been particularly harsh for the local bear population. An unseasonably cold spring, followed by drought conditions, had severely reduced the berry crops that normally sustained the massive Russian grizzlies through their pre-hibernation feeding period. Wildlife biologists would later confirm that many bears in the region were showing signs of severe malnutrition, making them increasingly desperate and aggressive in their search for food. By mid-afternoon, their fishing had been moderately successful. Viktor had caught 2 decent-sized pike, while Daniil had managed to land his first salmon of the trip, much to his obvious delight. The fish were being kept in a large cooler filled with river water, and the scent of their catch was beginning to permeate the immediate area around the boat. Approximately 400 meters downstream, Yuri Petrov, a 51-year-old local guide who had been fishing these waters for over 3 decades, had anchored his smaller boat near a fallen log that often attracted fish. Petrov later told investigators that he had noticed unusual sounds coming from the forest throughout the day, including what he described as the distinctive huffing and branch breaking that typically indicated a large bear moving through dense vegetation. At approximately 3:47 p.m., according to Petrov's later testimony, he observed a massive brown bear emerge from the tree line roughly 200 meters upstream from where Viktor's group had been fishing. The animal, which wildlife officials later estimated to weigh between 550 and 600 kilograms, appeared emaciated despite its enormous size. Its ribs were clearly visible, and its normally thick coat appeared patchy and dull. The bear had apparently been tracking the scent of the caught fish for some time. Without hesitation, the desperate animal plunged into the river and began swimming directly toward the motorboat with powerful, determined strokes. Bears are surprisingly capable swimmers, and this particular animal moved through the water with alarming speed and purpose. Viktor was the first to notice the approaching danger. He immediately began shouting warnings to his companions while frantically attempting to start the boat's outboard motor. Irina quickly pulled both teenagers toward the center of the ship, telling them to stay low and remain calm. The witness would later describe Daniil as appearing more curious than frightened, while his younger sister Alina seemed to grasp the severity of their situation immediately. The motor, which had been running smoothly all day, chose that critical moment to fail. Viktor pulled the starting cord repeatedly, producing only grinding sounds and occasional sputtering. The bear was now less than 50 meters away and closing fast, its massive head visible above the water as it powered toward them with single-minded determination. Yuri Petrov, witnessing the unfolding disaster, immediately fired a marine flare gun into the air and began shouting at the top of his lungs, hoping to distract or frighten the approaching bear. His efforts proved futile. The starving animal had apparently committed entirely to reaching the source of the fish scent and showed no signs of being deterred. The first impact came when the bear reached the boat's starboard side. Using its massive forepaws, it struck the fiberglass hull with such force that the entire vessel lurched violently to port. Victor lost his footing and fell backward, while Irina struggled to maintain her grip on both teenagers. The bear then began using its claws to gain purchase on the boat's side, its weight causing the vessel to list dangerously to one side. Victor managed to regain his footing and grabbed an aluminum boat hook, attempting to push the animal away. The bear responded by lunging forward and striking Victor with its right paw, the blow connecting with his chest and shoulders with devastating force. The impact sent Victor over the side and into the water, where the bear immediately turned its attention to him. 16-year-old Danielle, displaying either remarkable courage or teenage foolishness, attempted to help Victor by throwing their tackle box at the bear's head. This action only served to attract the animal's attention to the boy. With Victor struggling in the water nearby, the bear hauled itself partially into the boat and struck Danielle with its left paw, knocking him unconscious and sending him over the opposite side. Irina and Alina found themselves trapped in the boat's small cabin area, as the massive bear, now partially inside the vessel, began methodically destroying everything within reach. The animal seemed driven by an almost frantic hunger, tearing apart the cooler containing their catch and consuming the fish with desperate efficiency. Yuri Petrov later testified that he could hear Irina shouting for help and Alina screaming, but the bear's massive bulk blocked most of his view of what was happening inside the boat. He attempted to approach in his own vessel, but was forced to maintain a safe distance as the enraged animal continued its attack. The bear's rampage inside the confined space of the boat cabin lasted approximately 8 minutes. When Petrov was finally able to approach the scene, he found all 4 members of the fishing party had succumbed to their injuries. Victor and Danielle were found in the water nearby, while Irina and Alina were discovered inside the destroyed cabin. The bear had disappeared back into the forest by the time emergency responders arrived nearly 2 hours later. Petrov had used his satellite phone to contact authorities immediately after confirming there were no survivors, but the remote location made rapid response impossible. Regional wildlife officials later confirmed that the attack was consistent with the behavior of a severely malnourished bear driven to desperation by food scarcity. They issued immediate warnings to all recreational users of the waterways in Ussuri Krai, emphasizing that even activities typically considered safe, such as motorboat fishing, could become dangerous when bears were forced into unusual hunting behaviors by environmental pressures. The incident marked the first recorded case in the region of a brown bear attacking people in a motorboat, highlighting the unpredictable nature of wildlife encounters when natural food sources become scarce. The rugged mountains of central Colorado had long been recognized as prime black bear habitat, with dense forests and abundant natural food sources supporting one of North America's healthiest bear populations. However, September 2021 would prove to be a month when the delicate balance between human recreation and wildlife behavior would be violently disrupted in ways that few visitors to the region could have anticipated. Mara Jensen, a 31-year-old software engineer from Denver, had organized a weekend retreat with 5 college friends at a remote cabin nestled approximately 25 kilometers southwest of a small mountain town. The rustic structure, built in the 1970s, sat on private land surrounded by national forest and had been rented through a vacation property website. The group had planned a combination of hiking, fishing, and general relaxation away from their urban routines. The cabin itself was typical of older mountain construction, featuring log walls, a stone fireplace, and large windows designed to showcase the surrounding wilderness. What the property listing had not mentioned was that the structure's remote location and previous guests' careless food storage practices had attracted the attention of local wildlife throughout the summer months. Mara's group consisted of Tom Harris, a 29-year-old accountant, Sarah Mitchell, a 30-year-old nurse, David Chen, a 32-year-old teacher, and Jennifer Walsh, a 28-year-old marketing specialist. They had arrived on Friday evening, September 10th, and spent Saturday hiking local trails and preparing elaborate meals in the cabin's well-equipped kitchen. Unknown to the group, a large male black bear weighing approximately 180 kilograms had been systematically raiding campsites and rental properties in the area throughout the late summer. Colorado wildlife officials had received multiple reports of an unusually bold bear that showed no fear of humans and had learned to associate cabins and campsites with easy food sources. On Saturday night, the group had prepared a barbecue dinner on the cabin's deck, leaving cooking utensils and food scraps outside longer than recommended by local wildlife guidelines. The scent of grilled meat and leftover food attracted the attention of the problematic bear, which had been foraging in the area for several days. At approximately 2:30 a.m. on Sunday, the sleeping occupants were awakened by loud crashes and splintering wood coming from the cabin's side entrance. Mara initially assumed that high winds had blown over outdoor furniture, but the rhythmic nature of the impact suggested something more deliberate and concerning. Tom Harris was the first to investigate, approaching the side door with a flashlight while the others gathered in the main living area. Through the door's window, he could see a massive black shape methodically destroying the wooden steps and attempting to gain entry to the cabin. The bear had apparently detected food odors from inside and was determined to investigate further. The group quickly realized that their situation was potentially dangerous. Mara attempted to secure the main room by pushing furniture against the entrances, while the others gathered flashlights and anything that might serve as a weapon or deterrent. The cabin's construction, while charming, was not designed to withstand a determined bear attack. The black bear eventually succeeded in destroying the side door's frame, allowing it to push into the cabin's mudroom area. The animal immediately began investigating food storage areas, tearing apart cabinets and scattering supplies with methodical efficiency. The sound of splintering wood and crashing metal filled the small structure. When the bear attempted to break through the interior door leading to the main cabin, Tom Harris positioned himself to defend the others. As the door gave way, the bear pushed through and immediately struck Tom with its right paw, knocking him backward and inflicting deep claw wounds to his shoulder and chest. The impact sent him crashing into a wooden coffee table, resulting in additional injuries. Mara and the others immediately began shouting and shining flashlights directly at the bear while throwing whatever objects they could reach. The combination of bright lights, loud noises, and multiple moving figures apparently confused and intimidated the animal, which retreated to the mudroom area to continue investigating food sources. For approximately 45 minutes, the standoff continued, with the bear methodically destroying food storage areas, while the humans maintained their defensive position in the main room. The animal showed particular interest in a large cooler containing their weekend food supplies, eventually dragging it outside through the destroyed door. Once the bear had secured the cooler and its contents, it appeared to lose interest in the cabin itself. The group waited another hour before cautiously investigating the damage and determining that the animal had departed the immediate area. Tom Harris's injuries, while serious, were not life-threatening, and the group was able to provide basic first aid until emergency responders arrived. Colorado wildlife officials later confirmed that the attacking bear matched descriptions of an animal that had been causing problems throughout the region. The bear was eventually located and relocated to a more remote area, though officials acknowledged that animals displaying such bold behavior rarely modify their patterns permanently. The incident served as a stark reminder that even modern cabin construction offered little protection against determined wildlife, and that proper food storage in bear country was not merely a suggestion, but a critical safety requirement that could mean the difference between a peaceful weekend and a life-threatening encounter. The mountainous regions of central Slovakia had experienced a significant expansion of their brown bear population throughout the early 2020s, with improved conservation efforts leading to increased encounters between humans and these powerful predators. July 2024 would demonstrate how quickly a peaceful camping experience could transform into a terrifying confrontation when wildlife management and human behavior intersect in dangerous ways. The mountain campground where the incident occurred sat at an elevation of approximately 900 meters, surrounded by dense coniferous forests that provided an ideal habitat for European brown bears. The facility had operated for over 3 decades, primarily serving families and outdoor enthusiasts seeking access to hiking trails and scenic mountain landscapes. Katarina Novak, a 28-year-old graphic designer from Bratislava, had organized a camping weekend with 4 friends, planning to spend 3 days exploring the region's natural attractions while staying in the campground's RV rental units. Her companions included Pavel Horak, a 30-year-old engineer, Andrea Svoboda, a 26-year-old teacher, Martin Krejci, a 32-year-old photographer, and Zuzana Pokorny, a 29-year-old nurse. The group had arrived on Friday evening, July 12th, and spent Saturday participating in typical camping activities, including hiking, cooking outdoors, and socializing with other campers. The campground's relaxed atmosphere and beautiful mountain setting had created exactly the peaceful retreat they had been seeking. What the campers did not realize was that the unusually warm summer of 2024 had significantly altered local wildlife behavior patterns. European brown bears, typically more active during cooler periods, had extended their foraging activities well into the evening hours. Additionally, a series of dry conditions had reduced natural food sources, forcing bears to explore alternative options, including human food supplies. The campground itself had experienced minor bear encounters throughout the summer, but management had not implemented comprehensive wildlife deterrent measures or adequately educated guests about proper food storage procedures. Many campers, including Katarina's group, had been leaving coolers and food supplies outside their RVs overnight. At approximately 11:30 p.m. on Saturday, a large male brown bear weighing an estimated 350 kilograms emerged from the forest and began investigating the campground's perimeter. The animal appeared to be following scent trails from improperly stored food and garbage that had accumulated throughout the busy weekend. The bear initially focused on overturned garbage containers and abandoned picnic supplies, methodically searching for any edible items that might be available. However, the concentrated food odors from multiple RVs and campsites soon attracted its attention to the main camping area, where dozens of families were sleeping. Katarina and her friends were awakened by the sound of metal crashing and what Pavel later described as heavy breathing directly outside their RV. Through the vehicle's windows, they could see a massive dark shape moving between nearby campsites, occasionally stopping to investigate tents and outdoor equipment. The bear approached their RV and began sniffing around the entrance, apparently detecting food odors from their evening meal preparation. When it encountered resistance from the locked door, the animal started striking the vehicle's exterior walls with its forepaws, producing deep scratches in the aluminum siding and causing the entire structure to shake violently. Other campers throughout the facility were simultaneously experiencing similar encounters as the bear moved systematically through the area. The animal knocked over bicycles, collapsed several tents, and destroyed camping furniture while searching for food sources. Its powerful claws left deep gouges in RV exteriors and completely demolished several outdoor storage areas. Katarina and her friends recognized that remaining inside their RV provided limited protection against a determined bear attack. They began implementing noise-making strategies they had read about in camping guides, banging metal pots and pans while shouting through the windows in attempts to intimidate or confuse the animal. Their noise-making efforts were joined by other campers throughout the facility, creating a cacophony that apparently succeeded in overwhelming the bear's senses. The animal began moving more erratically between campsites, occasionally retreating toward the forest edge before returning to investigate new areas. The confrontation continued for approximately 45 minutes, during which the bear caused extensive property damage but showed no signs of aggressive behavior toward the humans themselves. The animal appeared more interested in accessing food supplies than in confronting the campers directly, though its massive size and strength made even non-aggressive behavior extremely dangerous. Eventually, the combined noise from multiple camping groups and the lack of easily accessible food sources convinced the bear to abandon its investigation of the campground. The animal retreated into the forest shortly after midnight, leaving behind a scene of considerable destruction but no human injuries. Damage assessment the following morning revealed that the bear had affected more than 20 individual campsites, with several RVs requiring major repairs and numerous tents destroyed. The incident prompted immediate changes to the campground's wildlife management policies, including mandatory food storage requirements and improved education programs for guests. Slovakian wildlife officials later confirmed that the attacking bear exhibited behavior consistent with animals experiencing food stress due to environmental conditions. They emphasized that proper food storage and waste management were critical factors in preventing similar encounters, particularly as bear populations continued to recover throughout Central Europe. The incident served as a wake-up call for the camping industry regarding the need for comprehensive wildlife management strategies in areas with recovering predator populations, highlighting how quickly recreational activities could become dangerous when proper precautions were not maintained. On September 7, 2025, the Petrov family settled into their RV along a forested road in Russia's Amur region. They had been traveling for days, eager to enjoy the quiet wilderness before returning home. Alexei, a factory worker in Khabarovsk, loved the outdoors and often took his family on short trips, teaching them to respect nature while escaping the noise of city life. His wife, Tatiana, had packed warm blankets, food, and books for the children, wanting them to feel safe and comfortable even in remote places. Their daughter Mila, only 10, carried her sketchpad everywhere, filling it with drawings of animals and trees. At the same time, 7-year-old Daniel was full of energy, curious about every rustle in the forest. Together, they hoped for a peaceful night before the long drive back. The evening was calm. The children read quietly in their bunks while Alexei checked the RV's locks, and Tatiana heated a small meal on the stove. Outside, the forest stretched endlessly, shadows deepening as night closed in. The family had camped before, but this road felt lonelier, surrounded by dark pines and distant hills. Still, inside the RV, the warmth of home traveled with them. They believed the walls of the vehicle would shield them from anything that moved outside. At around 2 a.m., the fragile calm shattered. A massive grizzly, gaunt with hunger, slammed against the side of the RV with a roar that shook the thin walls. The vehicle rocked violently as claws scraped against the metal frame. Glass shattered as the beast ripped through a side window, showering the interior with shards. Panic spread instantly as the family scattered, each movement frantic against the noise of tearing steel. Alexei grabbed the nearest object he could find, a fire extinguisher, and rushed forward. His effort was brave but hopeless. Within seconds, the bear's weight pinned him down, its claws and jaws tearing through him as the family screamed in horror. Blood spread across the floor while the walls shook with every impact. Tatiana, desperate, shoved Mila into a storage hatch and gestured for silence before turning back toward the bunks. Daniel tried to hide beneath the blankets, but the predator lunged, ripping through wood and fabric with terrifying ease. Tatiana's last stand was short as the bear's rage crashed down upon her. Mila crouched in the dark, hands pressed over her mouth, trembling as every sound tore through the night. Screams, crashing wood, then silence, broken only by the growls and the noise of the animal rummaging through the wreckage. Time stretched endlessly inside the ruined RV as the child waited, her heart pounding in her ears. The RV stood broken and silent as dawn spread a gray light over the Amur forest. Mila remained curled in the storage hatch, body stiff and mind frozen, the air thick with the stench of blood and the heavy musk of the predator that had torn her family apart. Hours dragged slowly and the child did not move, terrified that the beast might still be nearby. Every creak of the shattered vehicle made her flinch. The walls of the RV, once a safe shelter, now stood twisted and splintered, a cage filled with wreckage and memories too heavy for her young heart to bear. Outside, the forest carried on as if nothing had happened. Birds called through the morning mist, and a cool breeze pushed branches against the torn sides of the vehicle. The Grizzly had left after tearing through food and supplies, leaving only scattered pieces of clothing, broken furniture, and the silence of loss. The massive paw prints leading back into the trees were deep and wide, a testament to the unstoppable force that had struck during the night. When locals from a nearby settlement finally arrived, alerted by the absence of the Petrovs, who were expected on the road that morning, the sight before them froze their steps. The RV's windows were jagged holes, doors torn from hinges, and the ground stained dark. The scene spoke clearly of what had unfolded in those violent minutes. As they approached cautiously, one of the men noticed a faint, soft, and uneven sound coming from inside the wreckage. They found Mila still hiding, her small frame pressed against the cold metal walls of the hatch. She was bloodied, her clothes torn, her face pale and streaked with tears, yet she was alive. When she was lifted gently from the hiding place, she clung tightly, trembling, eyes wide and unblinking. Her silence told more than words ever could. Officials arrived quickly, marking the site as one of the worst bear incidents the Amur region had seen in decades. Rangers followed the tracks into the forest, but did not locate the animal, knowing it could still be roaming nearby. They warned that food scarcity, shrinking habitats, and human encroachment had made grizzlies in the region unpredictable and dangerously bold. The Petrov family had unknowingly camped in a corridor where hungry predators roamed, their presence magnified by the scent of stored meat and warm food. Mila was taken into the care of relatives, her survival viewed as nothing short of miraculous. For the community, the tragedy served as a poignant reminder of the fine line between wilderness and safety. Villagers reinforced warnings about camping in isolated areas, underscoring the importance of caution. They emphasized the need for stronger barriers between people and wildlife. In the weeks that followed, the story of the Petrovs spread beyond the region. To many, it was not only a tale of devastation, but also of one child's endurance. In the cold silence of that ruined RV, Mila had carried the weight of survival, a fragile life preserved amid chaos, echoing the harsh truth that the Amur forest spares no one who underestimates its dangers. August 2024 unfolded with long days of fishing near Kodiak Island, where men had traveled to test their skills against rich waters filled with salmon. Among them was Aaron McCoy, a seasoned pilot in his early 40s. Aaron had spent much of his life guiding fishermen and hunters across the rugged Alaskan coast. Flying small planes into remote inlets was his way of life, a craft he had mastered after years of battling unpredictable winds and sudden storms. Known for his calm focus, he carried the responsibility of not only transporting clients safely, but also ensuring their survival in wilderness conditions where danger was never far away. The group of fishermen he ferried that week had come for the thrill of pulling heavy salmon from icy rivers. They worked in pairs, hauling coolers filled with the catch that would later be flown back to the mainland. These were men used to long days and tough conditions, their clothes soaked with salt spray and fish oil. Spirits were high as they moved toward the dock, tired but pleased, unaware that the smell of their hard work carried farther than they imagined. The wooden dock stretched out over calm water, its surface slick with moisture from sea air. Aaron prepared the float plane for departure, checking lines, inspecting fuel, and reviewing the weather as the fishermen organized their gear. The scene was ordinary, almost routine, until the wilderness reminded them how thin the line was between safety and peril. From the thick trees near the shoreline came the unmistakable movement of something heavy. The sound of splintering branches echoed across the inlet, followed by the thunder of paws striking earth. A massive Kodiak bear, drawn by the rich scent of salmon packed in the coolers, appeared at the edge of the dock. It wasted no time circling or sniffing. Instead, it surged forward with terrifying speed. The men froze for a moment, the size and power of the creature too overwhelming to process. Shouts erupted as the bear lunged down the dock, claws tearing into the wooden boards. One fisherman stumbled as he spun to retreat, his boots sliding on the wet planks. He tumbled sideways into the cold water just as the bear's paw slashed out, shredding his thigh. His cry of pain mixed with the roar of the predator as red spread quickly in the waves. Panic spread through the group. Some swung gaff hooks wildly, trying to strike the advancing animal, while others hurled ropes and bags in desperation. The air was filled with the clash of human voices, the thrash of water and the thunderous roars of the Kodiak that refused to slow its assault. On the float, the injured man clawed at slippery metal, desperate to climb back aboard. Every second stretched like an hour as the bear pressed forward, eyes locked on its prey, muscles rippling with raw force. At the cockpit, Aaron acted quickly. His hands shook as he moved for the ignition, knowing their only chance was the machine he trusted. The float plane came alive with a roar as the propeller spun into a furious blur, churning air into a violent blast. The dock shook under the combined weight of the beast and the machine, each side straining in the standoff that would decide who claimed the space. The force of the spinning propellers blasted wind and spray down the dock, hitting the advancing Kodiak with a wall of power it had not expected. The beast staggered, fur whipping in the torrent, eyes narrowing against the stinging rush of air. It roared in anger, rising on its hind legs before slamming down against the wooden planks once more. The sound shook the men to their core, yet the machine's fury was greater. The animal lurched forward again, then halted as the spinning blades tore the air between it and the fisherman. With a final bellow that echoed across the inlet, it turned sharply and bounded toward the tree line, crashing back into the wilderness it had emerged from. For several moments, no one moved. The dock quivered in silence except for the drone of the engine and the splash of water against the floats. Then the cries of the wounded fisherman pulled everyone into motion. His leg poured blood into the dark water, the gashes deep and ragged. His face was pale, but his arms thrashed as he clung to the side of the float, refusing to sink. Strong hands reached down, pulling him up with effort, dragging him into the cabin where his clothes were stained red. Inside, the men worked frantically to slow the bleeding. They tied belts and rope tightly around his thigh, pressing cloth hard into the torn flesh. Aaron kept the propellers roaring, eyes locked on the tree line, ready in case the animal returned. Minutes felt longer than hours until he was sure the predator had truly vanished into the forest. Only then did he ease the throttle and prepare the aircraft for departure. The float plane lifted from the inlet with a shudder, and the men pressed against the windows, staring down at the dock that had turned into a battlefield. Below, the boards bore deep claw marks, gear lay scattered, and one cooler bobbed in the water, spilling salmon into the tide. The wilderness had left its signature behind, a reminder of what they had faced and narrowly survived. By the time the plane reached the nearest hospital, the fisherman had grown weak, his breath shallow. Doctors rushed him into surgery, stitching muscle and repairing tissue torn by the bear's claws. Hours passed before news came that his life had been saved, though the scars would remain as a permanent mark of the encounter. Relief washed over the group, though their minds still replayed the chaos again and again. In the days that followed, wildlife officers issued warnings to villages and camps near Kodiak Island. They explained that bears often learn to linger near docks during salmon runs, their hunger drawing them to the scent of easy food. What many had thought of as safe havens for fishing and travel could quickly become ambush sites. The men who lived through that day carried the memory with them, the sound of roaring wind clashing against a roaring beast etched forever in their minds. For Aaron, the moment served as proof of the thin line between control and catastrophe. The dock had almost been their final resting place, yet quick action and a machine's power had shifted fate just enough to spare them. August 2021 was a busy season on Kodiak Island, where cruise ships carried groups of travelers, hoping to glimpse the world's largest brown bears in their natural habitat. Among those who stepped off the vessel was Michael Harrington, a 42-year-old tourist who had long been fascinated by wildlife. Back home, he was known among friends for his love of photography and for posting dramatic pictures of his adventures. The trip to Alaska had been a lifelong dream, planned for years, and he carried with him not just excitement but also an eagerness to capture images unlike any he had taken before. His phone was his constant companion, every scene through its lens becoming part of a collection he wanted to share with the world. Guides and rangers greeted the group with firm instructions. They spoke clearly about the dangers of approaching bears, warning that distance was the only real protection when entering their territory. The other tourists nodded, uneasy but attentive as they stepped into the rugged wilderness. The rivers shimmered with salmon runs and the scent of fish carried through the damp air. Along gravel bars, the bears moved with slow, deliberate power, dipping their massive paws into the water with ease. Cameras clicked from safe vantage points, the visitors awestruck by the sheer scale of the creatures. For most, the warnings were enough. They stayed clustered together, their guides keeping them close. But Michael's desire for a close-up burned stronger with each passing minute. His eyes locked onto one enormous Kodiak fishing at the edge of the current. Its fur was dark, wet with spray, muscles rolling beneath the thick coat as it hauled salmon from the water. It was the moment he had been waiting for. Quietly, while others were distracted, Michael slipped away from the group, his steps slow and careful as he moved toward the gravel bar. The bear continued its hunt, seemingly unaware, while Michael crouched low, lifting his phone. He positioned himself so the animal filled the frame, his own face tilted toward the lens. For a heartbeat, everything seemed perfect. The wilderness behind him, the massive predator in focus, his smile frozen in the glow of the screen. Then the animal raised its head. Its nose flared, eyes sharp as it fixed on the figure too close for safety. In an instant, its calm hunt turned into violent motion. With a surge of speed that defied its size, the bear charged down the gravel bar. Michael stumbled backward, his phone tumbling into the stones as panic seized him. Shouts erupted from the distant group, but the predator closed the distance in seconds. He tried to turn, tried to flee, but the Kodiak was upon him, claws striking his back and dragging him into the shallows of the river. Water splashed as the force of the impact sent him sprawling. The scene turned from wonder to horror in an instant, the wilderness revealing its merciless edge. Water churned as the bear's massive weight crashed into Michael, its claws raking deep and its jaws snapping with raw power. The gravel bar turned red as he was dragged across the stones, his body twisting helplessly under the strength of the predator. The tourists, standing with the guides, froze in shock, their shouts echoing across the river, but drowned out by the roar of the animal. Panic spread as some backed away toward the boats while others stumbled, unable to look away from the violent scene unfolding in front of them. The guides reacted with desperate speed, pulling flare guns from their packs. Bright streaks of light cracked into the air, hissing and sparking, but the predator did not release its grip. Warning shots echoed from rifles, ringing through the mist, but the sound only made the animal lift its massive head, its jaws stained, before lowering it again with terrifying force. Within seconds, silence replaced screams. Michael's struggle ended as the river carried the splash of water and the shifting of gravel back into stillness. The bear, gaunt from hunger, finally pulled away, its dark eyes flashing toward the group's flashing lights. For tense moments it stood broad and unyielding, every breath steaming in the cool air, as if daring anyone to come closer. The guides continued to fire, the air filling with smoke and sparks, until at last the animal turned. With heavy steps it retreated into the trees, vanishing between the dense trunks as quickly as it had arrived. What it left behind was horror that would never fade from the minds of those who had witnessed it. The tourists gathered in shock, many weeping, some clinging to each other as their bodies trembled uncontrollably. The guides moved quickly, keeping them together and urging them to the boats, while others stayed behind to mark the place. Phones had captured fragments of the chaos, screens shaking as the story burned itself into memory. But none needed proof. Every face showed the same truth. They had seen the cost of ignoring warnings in a land where survival depends on respect for nature's laws. When rangers arrived hours later, they found the gravel bar torn and stained, the scattered phone still lying in the stones where Michael had dropped it. The body was carried carefully from the shallows, covered, and placed onto the boat with solemn silence. The group sat wordless as they were ferried back, the joy that had filled their excursion erased by grief. In the days that followed, the news spread quickly. Reports described the attack as one of the most chilling in recent memory, not because of numbers, but because of its cause. Curiosity and recklessness had turned into tragedy, a reminder to the world of how little stands between safety and disaster in wild country. Officials repeated their warnings, urging future visitors to listen, to remember, and to understand that on Kodiak Island, distance means life. For the survivors, the image of the glowing movie-like scene they had expected was replaced forever by a darker one. The sight of a man reaching for a perfect picture had turned in an instant into a lesson that none of them would forget. On October 4th, 2025, the dark forest of Russia's Ussuri Krai was quiet, except for the soft hum of insects and the distant rush of a river. 5 friends from Vladivostok had arrived earlier that day for a short weekend camping trip. They had parked their SUVs in a clearing by the water, setting up rooftop tents and small campfires as dusk settled over the valley. The group had spent the evening laughing, cooking fresh fish, and telling stories under the pale light of the moon. The smell of grilled food lingered in the cold air, drifting into the nearby woods. None of them noticed the shadow moving through the trees, its massive body silent against the ground. By midnight, the fire had burned down to a low level. The campers climbed into their tents on top of the vehicles, locking up their coolers and gear below. The river murmured, the night wind whistling faintly through the branches. But at 12:40 a.m., the stillness shattered. A heavy crack echoed from the forest edge as a huge Russian grizzly stepped out into the open. Its thick coat glistened in the moonlight, and its eyes reflected a dull, menacing gleam. The bear had caught the scent of food, mixed with the faint trace of cooking smoke. It moved closer, each step deliberate and heavy. Within seconds, it reached the first vehicle. The metal creaked under its weight as it climbed onto the hood, its claws leaving deep scratches on the surface. The campers stirred, hearing the noise, but it was too late to react. With a violent roar, the bear lunged at the first rooftop tent, tearing through the fabric like paper. 2 of the men inside screamed as the structure collapsed around them. One was struck instantly, the other thrown down from the roof as the bear swiped again, its claws cutting through canvas and flesh alike. The sound of tearing fabric, smashing glass, and panicked cries filled the clearing. Another camper tried to grab a hatchet from below, but barely managed to open the car door before the beast turned on him. The bear pinned him beneath its massive frame, its jaws snapping and blood soaking the ground. The vehicles rocked violently as the predator moved from one to another, crushing poles and bending metal beneath its power. One tent fell completely, trapping 2 campers inside. Their desperate shouts were drowned by the bear's growls and the sound of claws raking across the metal roofs. The attack lasted less than 5 minutes, but it felt endless in the cold, echoing night. The last tent collapsed as the grizzly's rampage came to a sudden halt. Breathing heavily, the animal turned toward the riverbank, leaving behind a silent, ruined camp. As dawn broke, mist covered the clearing like a veil. Sergei Ivanov, a fisherman nearby, spotted the wreckage from the river and approached carefully. The scene before him was almost unreal. Dented vehicles, shredded tents, torn sleeping bags, and claw marks deep in the metal. The bear was gone, but the destruction it left behind told a story of pure terror that had unfolded beneath the moonlight. Sergei Ivanov stood frozen near the destroyed camp as the morning light grew brighter across the valley. The cold air carried the smell of blood, smoke, and crushed earth. The 5 vehicles stood silent and twisted, their roofs bent and their tents torn open like paper. Sergei moved slowly between the wrecks, his boots sinking into the damp ground, each step heavier than the last. The damage around him spoke of unimaginable power and speed. One SUV had deep claw marks across the hood, Another was missing a side mirror, torn clean off, and a third had its windows smashed inward. The ground was littered with broken poles, scattered clothing, and shattered lanterns. The campfire had burned out completely, leaving only faint wisps of smoke curling into the morning air. He found signs of the terrible struggle everywhere. Bloodstains streaked the frozen mud, leading toward the riverbank where the bear had vanished into the forest. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the distant cry of ravens circling above the tree line. Sergei backed away, his heart pounding, and rushed down the trail toward the nearest ranger outpost. It took more than 2 hours, navigating rough ground, to reach help. By the time rescue teams arrived, the clearing had become a grim scene of investigation. Wildlife officers, medical responders, and police moved carefully among the remains. The bodies of the 5 campers were recovered, each one lying near their vehicles, their equipment still scattered. One officer pointed out the size of the claw marks on the steel frame of a truck door, each slash more than 5 inches apart. The sheer force that had dented the metal stunned even the most experienced rangers. Helicopters circled above, and a small group of villagers gathered at the forest edge, watching in silence. Reporters would later describe the attack as one of the most violent bear incidents in the region's history. The rescuers followed the bear's tracks deep into the forest, finding broken branches and patches of fur along the trail. Eventually, the animal was tracked down by wildlife authorities several kilometers away. It was confirmed to be an old male grizzly, likely starving and weakened, driven inland by the lack of food along the river. Its condition explained its unusual aggression, yet the devastation it caused still shocked everyone. As night fell again over the valley, search teams finished their work and sealed the area. The SUVs were left in place as evidence, their twisted roofs standing as silent reminders of what had happened. Locals spoke in hushed tones about the power of the wilderness and how even seasoned campers could not predict when nature might strike. A memorial was later built near the site, marked by 5 wooden crosses overlooking the river where the group had camped. In the weeks that followed, new safety rules were introduced for travelers and hunters in the Ussuri Krai, requiring bear-proof storage for food and stronger warnings for campers. But for those who visited the place afterward, the story remained unforgettable. The marks on the metal, the torn earth, and the eerie quiet that settled over the clearing served as a lasting memory of that tragic October night when 5 lives were lost beneath the shadow of a single enraged predator.